everyone. Hello. Wow, I think this is one of the best smelling launch events we've ever done. My stomach is grumbling. Anyways, welcome. Happy Wednesday. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. My name is Amali and I'm the events director here at Books on Magic. We are so excited to have Hetty McKinnon and Yewande Komolafe with us to celebrate the launch of Hetty's newest cookbook, Tenderheart. But before we get into all of that, I just have a few logistics to point out for how tonight's event is going to go. First off, mask wearing is optional at tonight's event. If you'd like an extra mask, we have some up at the front where you checked in. We will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the discussion, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After the talk tonight, Hetty will be signing and personalizing books at the table, actually that currently holds all the food. We'll let you know where and when to start lining up for that. And lastly, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we would love to encourage you to buy a copy of Tenderheart online using the link in the live stream description. All right, let's get into this. If you've ever wondered if there's a cookbook out there that will make you cry, and not just from cutting onions, this is the one. Tenderheart has an incredible mix of delicious recipes and beautifully crafted essays that explore the connections between our communities and our kitchens and the way that our loved ones live on through the recipes they teach and share with us. Hetty McKinnon is a Chinese-Australian cook and food writer. She is the author of 4 other cookbooks, including the much-loved To Asia with Love, the award-winning Family, New Vegetarian Comfort Food to Nourish Every Day, Neighborhood, Hearty Salads and Plant-Based Recipes from Home and Abroad, and Community, Salad Recipes from Arthur Street Kitchen. Hetty is also the editor and publisher of multicultural food journal Peddler and the host of the magazine's podcast, The House Specials. Born and raised in Sydney, she now resides in Brooklyn, New York. As I mentioned earlier, Yewande Komolafe joins Hetty in conversation tonight. Yewande is a Berlin-born, Lagos-raised food writer, cookbook author, and recipe developer, also based here in Brooklyn. She is a staff writer for the New York Times, where her column and recipes appear regularly. All right, that's all for me. Without any further delay, please join me in giving Hetty and Yewande a very warm welcome.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I also tell her to say that Hetty can do anything. Which is...
I'm sure there's things I can't do.
I think of you as like the queen of publishing.
Oh, really?
I really do. Because one of our first meetings was me asking you a lot about cookbooks and how you came to publish so many.
I have a lot to say about cookbooks.
Oh, I have to. But we'll save that conversation for another day. Okay, so I want to start with by asking, for the person who's unfamiliar with your work or who may be unfamiliar with your work, from Arthur Street Kitchen to your book's Neighborhood, all the way to Asia with Love, where does Tenderheart fit in as part of your larger story?
So I think most of my work is sequential. Like most of the books are written, well, they're all written, based upon where I am in my life at a particular time. I've heard them described as memoirish, and I didn't set out to make them that way, but I do feel like they do capture who I am and the things that I'm thinking and the things that I'm going through at a particular time. So it definitely, this book came on the heels of To Asia with Love, which was a real turning point for me in terms of the way I saw myself, the confidence that I suddenly had in my identity, something that I've, to be completely honest, struggled with my entire life, like trying to understand who I am as a Chinese girl who grew up in Australia. And so writing that book was incredible for me. And then at the end of it, I really just wanted to write my vegetable manifesto. It's like I started with salads and the community, and then, discovering my identity through food in To Asia with Love. And I just had this newfound kind of confidence in the food that I'm cooking and how it can be how it can encapsulate who I am as a person. And so I really wanted to write my vegetable manifesto, which I think is different to every other vegetable book on the market. I can say that very confidently because being a vegetarian for almost 30-something years, most vegetable books don't appeal to me. They treat vegetables in, a very specific way, whether it's very seasonal, and it's not really how I eat. It was how I ate when I was younger, but nowadays I want vegetables to be, accessible to everyone all year round. So that's what this book is, and it's really like a deep dive into 22 of my favorite vegetables and giving people different ways of thinking about them.
Why 22?
So 22 just happened.
Okay.
There was, so I write books in a really organic way. Like there wasn't a plan of the 22 vegetables that I would include. But when I sat down, these are the ones that kind of came out. And there were ones in there that I think people will be surprised about, like taro and seaweed, the turnips and daikon. Like I really want turnips to be like the new hot vegetable, because it's.
I actually have a question
Okay,
specifically about turnips.
We'll leave the turnips till later, but I wanted to include those specifically because I feel like they are a reflection of who I am, and taro is perhaps not a vegetable that many people have. Well, they might not see as an everyday vegetable, but for many people around the world, it is a staple, and it's as a staple as potatoes or
Absolutely.
any other starch. So I really just wanted to present a different, account of what an everyday vegetable can be.
I love that. So could you read for me page 20,
Yep.
which you headlined The Luxury of Seasonality?
Yeah. Oh, I love this page. Thank you for asking. So it's titled The Luxury of Seasonality. For the first 15 years of my life, I only ate the most seasonal of fresh produce. Working at the markets meant that my father was right on the pulse of all the latest harvests. But after he passed, we had to rely on our local greengrocer and nearby supermarkets for our fruits and vegetables. My mother often commented that this was the first time since moving to Australia some 20 years earlier that she had to buy her own produce. This marked a real change in our appreciation for the seasonal vegetables that we had always lived among. My mother was a dedicated shopper, and being a non-driver would catch buses and trains to purchase her weekly groceries. We still ate as seasonally as we could, but often due to practicality and lack of access, it wasn't always possible. It is impossible to separate vegetables from seasonality, but this book does not strictly prescribe cooking with the seasons. This is because I largely consider seasonality to be a luxury. While eating with the seasons may be easy and practical for some people, for others it is not. My intention with this book is to liberate home cooks from the anxiety of sourcing produce at specific times of the year. My manifesto is this: eat seasonally if you can, but don't stress if you can't. If you're craving a tomato in winter and you can nab one from the supermarket knowing it has been sitting for a while in cold storage, then that is completely okay. If you eat broccoli all year round like me, that works too. There are enough causes of angst in the world. Sourcing vegetables should not be one of them.
That's the sentence I pulled from it, that there are enough causes of angst in the world. Sourcing vegetables should not be one of them. Have you always felt this way about sourcing vegetables? And how would you say your perspective has evolved or changed over time?
So, I think for me it's been like a real duality because I grew up with a father who worked at the market, so obviously we ate like the best. Like I often say, I'm still searching for the apricots of my youth because I don't know whether it's like I've romanticized it in my head, but I just remember these big, juicy, sweet apricots that actually tasted like apricots, and I'm still looking for them. I can't find them, but I still
feel
try.
that way about several ingredients.
Yeah. Right, so like that was my childhood, and then when my father passed, we had to eat in a really different way. So accessibility became an issue for my mum and our family, and so that really changed the way I look at food. And I didn't always think about this because this was like a long time ago, but now like being a vegetarian and being really passionate about vegetables, I just feel like I want to eat vegetables all the time, and I'm lucky enough to live like in Brooklyn where there's many farmers markets. But sometimes I just don't get to go to them, and that's not going to stop me from eating vegetables. And I mean, my mum now shops from the supermarket or like Chinese groceries, which have the best vegetables, really. But I really wanted to take away that angst and say it's okay to go to your local supermarket. You know, it's that, and it's just to make vegetables egalitarian, to really liberate. Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why people don't eat enough vegetables is there's a lot of guilt. You know, there's words like sustainable and local and you know, it has to be grown within, I don't know, 10 miles. Yeah, exactly. And I think all of that can sometimes hold people back from eating vegetables. It's like, if it's not local and sustainable, I can't eat vegetables. But I think it's more important people just eat vegetables and think about them in a different way. So that's why I thought this page was really important for me to write, because it's something that I believe, it's something that I live, it's something I prescribe to, and I think it will perhaps, you know, switch something over in a lot of people's brains, hopefully.
So if you take nothing else from Tenderheart, this is the page page 20 is the page to look at.
Eat a tomato in January.
In
it's liberating, everyone. It's okay.
Just roasted. It tastes better roasted anyways. Okay, so to me, your work highlights vegetables and their versatility. But more importantly, I think it's a celebration of the actual way you eat. You have this very relatable line on page 475. For anyone who has said they don't like turnips, this is a dish for them. So could you talk about the perspective on vegetables you hope to share in your work with readers like me, a former pastry cook who would rather have a croissant than a turnip?
Oh, wow, I'd rather have a turnip, and I'm being really honest.
Wow.
I mean, like specifically, I mean, that's the recipe with the glazed turnips, right? I mean, it's so good. It's glazed with like miso, served with black rice. And often when I'm developing a recipe and I eat it, and I'm like pretty proud of myself. My husband's here, he can probably attest to that, where I'm like patting myself on the back, like that's amazing. And imagine thinking that about a turnip, right?
I am trying.
Yeah, I mean, I was first introduced to turnips at a farmer's market in Sydney, and I remember the vendor selling them said, they're really easy to make great. You just, you know, saute them in butter and garlic, and that's all it does take. But then you can take it a little bit further and inject lots of flavor. And I'm genuinely just so excited by what nature is giving us and what we can do to that. And I don't really prescribe to treating vegetables too lightly. You know, like there's a lot of, in the vegetable world, just a lot of like watermelon radish, and it's very dainty and delicate. But I want people to not be dainty and delicate, actually, to really like think of a vegetable like you would a piece of meat or any other protein, and, you know, char it, get into it, add lots of flavor, add lots of seasoning, just be almost aggressive with it. Because I think vegetables are not as delicate as people think they are.
Yeah.
And I find that really, really exciting, like the flavor and the texture you can get from something that's grown from the ground.
I would agree with you on that point, because I think that when I started to cook vegetables and understand flavor combinations, I started to enjoy them more.
Yeah.
And not just treat every vegetable as a salad, but I can roast it, I can braise it in oil. You know, there's so many options with it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that approach to vegetables, just treating it like food, which
like food, that's such a good line.
You know, like
vegetables are food.
I know, vegetables are food. That's exactly what it is. So doing that. Absolutely.
I mean, even like what you add, there was little boxes at the back with, there was a noodle salad with kale. It's from the kale chapter. And so like, what do you do with kale to make it interesting? Well, you know, you don't have to just eat kale on its own. It can go with other things. So I paired that with these classic flavors. When I was making it today, I was so happy because my hands felt like my mother's hands. So my mum's hands always smelled like ginger and scallions, that combination. And so that's a really, really classic, almost like a mother sauce for me, the ginger and the scallion oil. So that is, that goes great with kale, because kale is I love how robust the leaves are. Even after you've cooked them, they stay very robust.
Or massage them and get
Exactly.
them nice and tender.
I mean, I eat kale almost every day.
You are so happy talking about kale right now. I love it.
Kale's the kale chapter is probably my most cooked chapter for me
amazing.
Personally.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so I love that you touched on how your mother's hands smell, because food and memory is a theme in your book. It's a central theme in your book. And I would love for you to share how memory plays a role in your work.
Memory plays probably the biggest part for me, and more so as I progress in my work. It's for me, food unlocked memories, and the other way around too. It's kind of this interchange, a conversation. For me, if it wasn't for food, I don't think I would have a lot of the memories. A lot of the memories I have from childhood are around the context of food. Almost every memory I have is through something related to food. And clearly, memory is not absolute. Memory is a construct of experience and time and who we are today. Our memories change, and I'm very aware of that as I do this work that's so focused on memory. But that's almost a reason why I do it, because with this book in particular, because it's so much about my father, my memories of him have faded over the last 30 years, and I wanted to do this now as a way of capturing the way I remember him right now, which has changed over the years and will continue to change as I grow older. I'm the age now of my dad when he died, and that this year it's occupied a lot of my thoughts.
You're writing the book too.
Yeah, I mean, and it's been a great privilege for me to remember him in this book, and to be able to do it in such a joyous number of recipes, and to have him be my inspiration. And it can be seen as quite a sad topic, but I think what I really gained from it was this sense of joy, of celebration of his life, and to try to honor someone in food is not easy. In a book that is so absolute, in words that you can't change once they've been printed, in recipes that will take on lives of their own once people cook them. But to me, that's the essence of life, isn't it? It's passing it on. Yeah, continuation, sharing, seeing what other people will do with the recipes. I always find that, that's one of the big reasons I actually share recipes, is because I want other people to welcome recipes into their lives and to make it their own. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Have you found that the way you source, cook, think of ingredients are all heavily inspired by these memories? And could you just tell us more about your father?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, memory, flavors, memories of flavors from youth are a very big inspiration for me. And particularly because I'm vegetarian. So, I ate a lot. I mean, I ate meat when I was young, up until I was 19. And so I have a lot of memories of those dishes and the foods that my dad brought home, and the foods that how my mum would cook them. And so a lot of in terms of my recipes, has been about vegetarianizing and trying to recreate those dishes according to what I eat now, according to my diet.
So recreating the flavors,
textures, flavors and textures, and also playing on them too, because I'm also very cognizant that I always want my recipes to reflect me. So they are from somewhere, because no recipe is original. All recipes come from a source or an inspiration, and it's in whether that was oral history, it's all a continuation, as we've been saying. So to me, there's always a starting point or a midway point, but there's also like a great need to kind of encapsulate me in my recipes. So I just love that. I love like thinking of a dish and then saying, I could do that, but do it to reflect me, that I'm vegetarian. I live in New York. There are these types of flavors around me, and that's why there's a lot of like recipes that, I don't want to use the word fusion, but there is like a lot of combinations of cultures. Obviously now working in food, like you and I, we have a lot of food friends, and so I'm very influenced by their ingredients that they use and the products that they make and all of that. So
I think of recipes as energy, and how in science, like, energy is never created or destroyed. It just moves from one form to another.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And I think that was reading your book. I felt that.
Yeah.
It was something that you were from the past that you were recreating, and it was like, even though you lost your father, there was this energy that kept in your cooking and your food, and you're explaining the world through food. So I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, that's a really great way of thinking about it. I mean, it's hard to, even after writing this book, it's hard to kind of encapsulate like why. Like people say, why is this the right time to write this book? And I never think about that too much. Like story is at the essence of everything I do, like storytelling. So every recipe is a story. Every book obviously is a story. There is a central narrative. And I don't really know why I wanted to write about my father, but it was the vegetables that led me back to him. So it started off as a vegetable book, and it ended up being a vegetable book that was inspired and has the energy of my father running through it. Because there's no honest story that I can tell about me and my relationship to vegetables without starting with him. Because that's the world he created for us. I don't know if many of you have probably not seen the book yet because you're here at the launch. But my father is the narrative of the story. He's the face on the cover. Well, the face, recreated with vegetables. Actually, this was a project that we did many years ago in Peddler, and the original cover, the Australian cover, had a banana, and he was always known as the banana guy. So my dad was a banana monger. He traded, he worked for a very famous company, Wing On, in Sydney. They're still around in some form, but they were importers and exporters of bananas. And so he worked at the markets, and he just brought home amazing vegetables and fruits every day. And that's what we were surrounded by. And I describe it as just abundance. We were just surrounded by abundance and so much food. Probably explains why I'm so greedy about food now. But yeah, I mean, that's the world he created, and it was so, and he's he came to Australia from China as a late teen with his father. He was apparently studying business. I don't know how that works, but he was probably on a student visa. And he worked. My mum came, they got married. He was like a very model immigrant, there's a bit in the beginning where I describe the way he looked, and I think that could describe many Chinese immigrants in Australia or America at a time. He dressed very well. He always ironed on Sundays. He would have the radio on, listening to the horse races. He was into betting, and he'd be ironing for hours and hours. And he wore 3-piece suits every Sunday when we went to Chinatown in Sydney. His hair was immaculate. He was just a very well-dressed but very generous, kind person, and everybody knew him as that. He loved buying fruits, like bringing home fruits and vegetables and sharing them with, our doctor, the neighbors, our relatives.
You tell the story of being like the fruit delivery person in
Yeah.
your neighborhood.
Yeah, so like when I was writing the book, and my sister was telling me how when she was young, and I never did this, but this was her story, that she used to carry a basket around the neighborhood with fruit and vegetables, handing them out to neighbors.
That's incredible. And it's also funny that you ended up kind of doing the same thing with your company.
Yeah.
Delivery.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I think it all went back to the beginning,
That's
you know.
right.
So I think I don't know quite how it happened, but I'm really happy it did because I think food has just unlocked so many things for me that I'm so grateful for. So, and I hope that it will continue to do that.
I think it will. I think it's inside you, and it's just going to continue growing and blooming.
I hope so.
Yeah. Okay, so my last question. So similar to you, I experienced grief very young. I was 16 when I lost my older brother, and reading Tenderheart, I felt a lot less isolated. And it's something just in our friendship in general that we've talked about, grief, in our many conversations. So going back to the themes that you've shared of family, profession, sustenance, could you share how your grief has evolved?
Just talk about saving your hardest question for last. Look, I actually can't believe I wrote this book sometimes. You know, we have shared, you know, there's an essay in here about my friend Maria, and it was about when I first met her and I think I share this because I think it's a similar connection that we had when we first met, that I didn't know that there was something about her that drew her to me. Like she was really happy, and there was something in her eyes that I could tell that was our connection. And she was a stranger to me when she came to my house when I first moved to New York. We shared salads, and at the end of the meal she told me she had lost her parents not that long ago. I don't know if Maria's here, she was going to come, but and there's that connection I always feel with people, whether it's just, as to use your word, energy. The grief, I mean, I was a teenager when my dad passed, and my mum was like, you know, suddenly found herself a widow at 44, you know, younger than I am. And so there was this idea that you just have to hold shit together to keep her together. You know, to hold like everyone had to just focus on holding everything together. So there was not time to grieve. And so as I got older and went on with my life, I think you just kind of push the grief aside. And it doesn't go anywhere. It's inside of you the whole time.
It also shows up in very strange ways.
That's right. That's right. And so it's there, and it becomes almost like it just attaches to your heart, and it's just there. But you don't really know what to do with it. And as you say, it comes out, and you sort of recognize it sometimes. And then, you know, like, so writing this book and almost like unconsciously writing a book about grief, and like how do vegetables relate to grief, but that's my story, you know. For me, like, somehow this story about vegetables has allowed me to find these words. Like, sometimes it's like, I don't even know how I wrote these words, and why am I sharing these words with people? But I know that, as you just said, when you read the words, you feel like you're not alone. That there is something in these words that people, and you don't have to have lost a person, but just grief can come to people in many ways for many different reasons, many different shapes and forms, as you say. And I think that just sharing it and being vulnerable, I think that that's when I feel my most truth. And I always have, like, I hold myself up to such high standards in terms of, like, am I being authentic to myself, to my family, to my mother. It's a terrible thing to admit at my age, but, like, you know, so much of the things that I do, I still think, would my mother approve of this? And I think it's because we lost my father at such a young age that I felt this almost, I think all the kids, like, I've got 2 siblings, I think we all experienced it in different ways. We all held that grief differently. But for me, because I was still at home, I really felt like I had a responsibility to not do anything that would cause her any more stress or harm or you know, just anything like that. So I think I still hold that with me. You know, now I live in another country, and all of that, and I still hold that. So
Absolutely.
but writing this book was so healing for me in a way that it allowed me to remember my father and remember him in whatever way that I remember him now, and not feel like I had to remember him in a way that was like from 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Like I've now, I've got 3 kids. I wanted to like kind of create this world about him that's my own narrative, that's purely my own memories, that is not the experience, it is not the lived experience of anyone else in my family. It's my experience, and I wanted to create that as kind of like a legacy. And if I'm not going to do it now, so...
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think Tenderheart is, to me, it's authentic to you and your experience. I think it's such a vulnerable book. I love all the themes that you explore, whether you meant to or not. And I'm so grateful to know you. I'm so grateful you shared this with the world. Thank you, Hetty.
Thank you.
So we're gonna throw it out to you guys if you've got any. Do you have anything else to say?
The one thing I did want to say was there was a quote that you wrote in your 10 essential Nigerian recipes for the Times, which was meant to be in the book but didn't make it to the book for whatever contractual and copyright reasons. Yeah. But it really stuck with me, and it was, I don't know if I can remember it off the top of my head, but it was the past.
I think we carry it with us, or it lives
Yeah,
with us.
it
Like
lingers deep within us, whether we know it or not. That's the context of it. And that quote actually was a really big inspiration to me for the book. I don't know if you knew that. But
I did not know that, so thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Good feels. Okay, so if you guys have any questions, how do we do this? Just raise your hand. Yeah, there's a microphone up here if you want to come up here too. Yeah, I'm gonna get up and.
Oh, wow.
Oh wait, is it gonna go?
You can just like repeat the question.
Oh,
right.
okay. I can do that too.
I'd love to know about how moving to New York from Australia has like changed your cooking and what you've enjoyed about living here, and kind of changing, like, I don't know, starting new recipes and new ingredients and what you, like.
Great question. So the question was how moving to New York has changed the way I cook, and that's in essence the question, right? So it's really changed everything. I mean, I think location is a huge influence in the way we cook. And I think I first touched on that in my book, Neighborhood, like really surrendering to your surroundings. And obviously I cook so differently now. There is like the world all around us, and the ingredients are different. And
Is it you trying to adapt ingredients to what you remember, or just
I think it's just
curiosity?
It's a lot of that, and a lot of it is actually being geographically away from my family. It forced me to cook Chinese food for the first time.
Yes.
So I really didn't cook that much Chinese food when I was in Australia because my mum does it.
Yeah.
And so actually moving here, and I think that's what led me down a lot of the path of like starting Peddler, writing about multicultural stories, me like really delving into my own cultural heritage and identity. That all really came from moving to New York. Because when you're it's an interesting experience being Chinese Australian in another country. It's a very different experience because people don't immediately know I'm Australian until I open my mouth and speak. But then it's confusing to a lot of people. Like, there's a lot of that. And so I've experienced that before when I lived in London too. There was like that confusion. I don't know why you have an Australian accent. You don't look Australian. Like there's a lot of that. There's all of that stuff.
Absolutely.
So, and it all plays with your identity. And I think for me, it was huge moving to New York and discovering those parts of myself. So I do feel like sometimes I can't move back home because being here brings out so much creativity and a need to be creative. So I drink a lot of coffee in Sydney. Like I just sit in cafes and
drink coffee.
Drink coffee. But here I feel a drive tell these stories and to touch on all those different aspects of my identity, which I think comes out quite well in recipes and storytelling.
I think part of it could also, because we've talked about this before, part of it is like there's a huge lack of diverse stories just in general in food media.
Yeah.
And I know in my experience, I just took it upon myself to be Nigerian and cook Nigerian food and share my identity, because if I don't, then who will?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, you know, like second generation Chinese food is something that's very unique. Like I didn't, like with To Asia with Love, for example, I didn't want to recreate my mum's recipes. Like I didn't want to be just like, here mum, I'm going to sit there and write down your recipes. Like I wanted those recipes to be mine and to reflect my experience, which is a different experience to hers. You can't separate her influence on me, obviously, because I ate her food every day growing up, and those flavors are my home, but there are other influences I wanted to build in there that felt more true to me and my experience. So yeah, it's a really interesting, multi-layered answer, but thank you. It was a great question.
What's the recipe out of Tenderheart that you make the most often, and why?
Okay, there's a few. Should I veer away from the cow chapter? I really do love the cow chapter. So there's one recipe I really, really love. I hope you all try, is the fennel frond pesto with gnocchi and shaved fennel. I just love it because it's got like, you take one vegetable, fennel, and then you take all the different aspects of it and you show it all in different ways. And so the fennel fronds, like what do you do with fronds? There's only so many fronds you can put on the top of a meal.
As a garnish.
As a garnish. And I really like eating it in a salad. It's not that good because it's quite like grassy, but it's great as a pesto. The idea of the recipe actually came from a friend in Melbourne during COVID. She told me, she's Italian, she told me she was making fennel frond pesto, and so I've played with different versions of it. So, and I love that dish. And, you know, then you just finely shave the fennel and you use store-bought gnocchi, like nothing fancy. You don't have to make your gnocchi.
What kind of nuts are in that pesto?
I don't know. I think there's actually seeds.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, seeds. So it's a really great, you can easily pull it together, weeknight friendly. I mean, almost everything is weeknight friendly because I want to be able to cook. You know, basically the way these recipes came together, it was a really fun process. Basically, I would look at what I had in my fridge and say, that's what I'm making tonight, and that's how I develop these recipes.
And that's the brilliance of Hetty.
I also have a really pantry because I'm a recipe developer. So like your pantry is, like I would say this is a vegetable-led book, but it's also a pantry-led book. You know, your pantry is like your weapon in cooking, you know, and so you do have to have a good pantry to cook well. And hopefully when you cook from this book, you'll gradually learn the tools of what do I need to keep in my pantry. Like gnocchi is a great one, keeps forever, shelf stable, you know. I always used to say about my mum's house, if there was a war or some famine, we could all go to her house and live for months because she had so much food. Unfortunately, I have that habit too, but I live in a much smaller apartment. But yeah, keep lots of spices and things like condiments. I mean, we live in New York, and we have the greatest condiments at our fingertips. So, you know, there's so many great artisanal brands that, you know, like the single source, support them because they're great. And yeah, I mean, just stock your pantry really well and lots of legumes. And,
what are your favorite condiments?
I use a lot of spices, obviously, but condiment-wise, I mean, I love chili oil. There's 2 chili oil recipes in the book. In the beginning, I've become quite obsessive about different versions of chili oil. So those of you who have To Asia with Love will know Everything Oil. There's Everything Oil 2.0 in this book, which is a umami crisp. So it's very similar in feel, but it has porcini mushrooms, although I just made a version yesterday with dried Chinese shiitakes, which is one thing you should always keep in your pantry because also keep forever. I really like shelf-stable products. But they add, you can make the simplest dashi in the world with just, shiitake mushrooms and a piece of dried seaweed. The recipe's in the book. It's in the seaweed chapter. But yeah, I also, kimchi was, it's not really a condiment, it's an ingredient. But kimchi was something I became quite obsessed with during COVID because, I got into a panic during those times of like, how am I going to cook like with a lot of flavor with no ingredients?
Yeah.
And it always came back to kimchi. So there's a lot of those recipes in this book.
There's
Like
the miso paste you got me, or you gave.
the
The
miso.
miso.
It's not in here.
Okay.
No, the miso paste.
Sorry, guys.
I make my own miso, and Yewande has some. But
Incredible.
that recipe is by Sonoko
Ah.
from Japanese home cooking. So
Nice.
that's a book. That, yeah.
Yes.
What would you make for an impressive dinner party out of Tenderheart?
Oh, that's a good question.
That menu that you made for Doris. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that was all salads.
Yeah, it was all salads. It was
Oh,
incredible.
what would I make for an impressive? I feel like there's a really nice butternut squash lasagna in this, but there's no pasta in it. So the sheets are basically the pasta. And that's not a gimmick. Like, it sounds like a gimmick, but it's not. It's just the idea of taking like really familiar flavors and applying them in a different way. So I think that like the people who have cooked that already really love it. And then I think for dessert, I would do the sweet potato and black sesame bundt cake because bunts are like effortlessly impressive. I mean, the only thing you can go do wrong is really like not line your pan properly. But if you line your pan properly, you don't have to do anything and people think it's super impressive. And the other thing that's impressive about that is it's like two-tone, it's two colors. It's
fun.
Yeah, and it's like it's like one batter which you split in half and you add black sesame to one half and sweet potato to the other half, and it actually has two different textures. One is like a little bit drier, one's very moist, and so there's that nice interplay of texture there.
Nice. I actually had a question pop in my head about sourcing ingredients. So things like sesame paste or black sesame paste.
Yeah.
What would you tell people that say, well, it's not in my regular down the street bodega or grocery store?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some things that are worth sourcing. I always have a lot of substitutions in my book, so there's always so for that black sesame cake, I say you could just use tahini. If you don't, if you really want to make it, you won't get that huge color contrast. But there is a little bit of there's a different taste to black sesame. But I would think, try it once with what you have, and then when you're like black sesame, you can get from any kind of Chinese grocery store. You can also get it online. So like in New York, I don't know if we have an excuse for saying we can't get anything. And I mean, Asian groceries, obviously there's many Asian grocery stores in H Mart is amazing. But there is this awesome website which I just did an order with called Asian Veggies, which has groceries from all different Asian backgrounds, and all the gailan, all the Asian greens. There's an Asian greens chapter in the book, and they deliver. They're amazing.
Incredible.
They're very cool, and they deliver the next day all around New York and New Jersey, I think.
I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
I have a question. When you're thinking about recipe development, are you thinking more about cooking for yourself or cooking for others?
Cooking for myself.
Absolutely.
But luckily other people, because I feel like, I'm a home cook, I'm not a chef, and I feel like what I like people also like. So I mean, I would never share a recipe that I don't like. And so I always do cook for myself because we eat everything that I cook. So I think that's almost why, I mean, a lot of people have said to me, your food has a particular taste. And that's because I do cook I think all recipe developers have almost,
myself.
yeah, that's right.
There's always something spicy in my recipes.
Yeah. So it has to be pleasing to me first, but I think that's why we are recipe developers, right? I mean, that's a reason why
Like we
people-
actually enjoy
yeah.
food.
And I do think maybe when you develop for other people, it's when it feels there's something not quite there, you know, with being diplomatic. But yeah, I feel like if you develop for yourself, it's when you really know it's delicious.
And you like it. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Would you say that for you, cooking is more about like the process or the product? And like when you go out to eat, do you find yourself more like enjoying the food or wondering how the food like came to be?
A bit of both. Bit of both. I mean, I think it's about the end product for me. So I'm not really like a technique person, although I do like it is fun sometimes. Like for example, when I did the sheet pan chow mein in To Asia with Love, that was really fun to recreate textures that I remember from youth in a different way. But I didn't do that just because I love sheet pan. I mean, people might think because I do a lot of sheet pan recipes, but that's because, you know, it's a product of my life. You know, I'm busy. Sometimes, yeah, I've got 3 kids, and like sometimes I just want to throw something in the oven and it's easy. But if I can do that and still recreate the textures from a dish that I remember from childhood, that's doubly awesome. But I do, when I do eat out, I get a lot of inspiration from eating out, because not in terms of recreating the dish per se, but getting a new idea on something, or traveling. Like Yewande and I both love Montreal.
Yeah.
She actually inspired me to go there, and
Queen Amman.
she's the Queen Amman. She wrote this amazing story about the Queen Amman, which is this pastry in Montreal. But just going to a new place and seeing how they cook something just sparks something interesting. And I would never recreate it the same way, but it's just inspiration and just thinking about things a different way. So that's something that's kind of re-emerged since COVID, that we can travel somewhere, and even going to a restaurant like is a novelty, but just seeing a different like flavor combination
Or a different technique, or
Yeah.
a different take on things.
Yeah, but I always wonder how people do things, but I don't wonder, and I'm not curious enough to try to recreate it. Like I'm not into like tricky things like foam and you know, all those like chefy things. I could not be bothered.
I love that you call them tricky things.
Feels like it takes too much time.
You had a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious. I love like all the layers of like flavor in your recipes. And I'm wondering like how do you know when they're done? Like how, like when it's gotten to this point where you're like, there's nothing else I can do. It's as best as it's gonna be.
I'm like a pretty, in terms of developing recipes, I don't overdo them. So the recipes really start in my head first. So I will write them often. Like even if I haven't written the entire recipe, sometimes I'll write the entire list of ingredients and then I'll add quantities as I test. But to me, like they're very under-tested in that I don't try and do things a different way. Like if I cook something and I like it, that's pretty much done to me, because there's always another opportunity to do something slightly different. But I do feel like there's almost a rawness to some of rawness in terms of flavor that is like, I feel very comfortable with flavor and putting things together. Like that's what I really love to do. I love like using a flavor combination in a way that's unexpected. So that's why I love doing that. I get really, really excited by that. So that's not something that I will like overplay with. It's just like sometimes the simple things, like I don't think my flavors are that simple, but it's just, you know, not to overdo something.
I think you layer flavors really well. Like there's a way to have about 5 different things going on in one dish and overdo it. But I think finding that balance with like 5 different flavors is a skill. It's something that you do really well.
Oh, thank you. I think I said this last night, but I think you know, I started off making salads, and I would say that salads are a fantastic way of learning about flavor, learning about texture, and learning about how to build those things together, because in every one of my salads there's many different elements. You know, there's a vegetable, and then there's a spice that's somehow on the vegetable, and then there's a hearty element, whether that's a legume or a grain or a carb like a noodles or rice, and then there's a dressing, and then there's some sort of topping. So there's a lot of layers there, but it's about kind of understanding the story of that salad. That's really exciting.
I was just wondering, I noticed a few dessert baked items in here. How, you usually find them in vegetable books, and they can often feel forced, like, oh, they, I'm gonna try and be different, or they, they should be in here. But just a few that I've seen seem very interesting and different. How do you, and it's just a different animal, or different, shouldn't say animal, different beast than cooking.
Yeah.
And how do you approach that in your everyday cooking? Did it come naturally, or did you?
Yeah, I mean, the dessert recipes in there felt very natural. I mean, I think there are some vegetables that lend towards sweets better than others. There's no broccoli dessert in there. I tried. Shocking. There was a tomato cake that I'd never ended up doing, but there's some, like, vegetables have such interesting character. There's a lot of layers in there that are unexpected. I think there's a fennel and black pepper ice cream. It's like I'm not a proper ice cream maker, so it's like a soft servey thing that you just do and put in the freezer. But that combination works so well because fennel. I mean, a lot of vegetables have a sweetness to them, and then I'm always trying to bring the sweetness back to the savory side. So then, like, that black pepper just adds that element that, just like a reminder that, actually it can also be a little bit savory, but it's definitely sweet. The other interesting dessert recipe is the eggplant brownie. And before you all run away crying and throwing up. So it originates in a recipe that was given to me in Sydney by a friend of ours. And I found it in I have these folders of like recipes that I've pulled out of magazines from 20 years ago. And in there was this emailed recipe of it's called a chocolate heartbreak cake. And it uses eggplant as to replace the fats. Okay. And I did some research because I thought this cannot be his recipe because he's a scientist. And it came across that it was in a book that was all about replacing fats in desserts with vegetables. So the eggplant replaces all fats in this brownie, and it's super delicious. And what the eggplant does is it adds like this richness. So it's not particularly like anything sweet or savory, but it's richness and that silkiness. So it's a really good one. I would recommend trying it. Good for parents who are trying to hide vegetables in food.
Okay, one more question. Oh, all the way back there.
I'm curious to learn more about your journey as a vegetarian. You said you became vegetarian, I think, when you were 19, so that looked very different than maybe now.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I struggle to remember what I used to eat all those years ago. Like, I think when I first turned vegetarian, my mum immediately started vegetarianizing a lot of the meals that I ate. So, like, the mapo tofu that's in To Age With Love was one of the recipes that she showed me. There's a lobako, which is a turnip paste that's in this book, in the turnip chapter. Even though it's not actually turnip, it's daikon.
Love turnips.
Yeah, but that's also a recipe that she showed me, like, how to vegetarianize. So there was a lot of that, but I didn't really think about my vegetarianism much, like in my 20s and even into my 30s. Not until I really started to cook that I really kind of discovered how exciting like vegetarian food could be. I find myself I'm a very natural vegetarian. Like, I'm not forcing anything. Like, I'm not missing meat. I don't like the texture of meat. It's not even that I don't like it. I just don't think about it. So to me, it's like so much part of my life that it's just feels very natural to me. So I do try and share that in my recipes, that it's not like thinking, oh, I'm missing the protein or the meat in this. It's really just a celebration of eating vegetarian and how exciting that can be, and how different and textural, and how much fun you can have with it. And I think that's what the recipes in this book really, to me, they're very fun recipes. They're like things that you might not have thought about. But it's also like being brave to lean on, like someone interviewed me recently and they were asking about the carbs, like, oh, you're not afraid of too many carbs. And I'm like, I ate rice every single night growing up. Like, carbs is just, it's our food,
Yeah.
So like just not thinking about, oh, this is carby, just think about it as food. And a lot of vegetarians say to me, oh, I eat too much pasta. Well, bring other things into it. You can bring rice or noodles. It's all carbs, but it's just being like mixing things up and, being
Not afraid to experiment.
Yeah, but it's been, I love it. I love sharing this vision, but I also, I really want my food to be inclusive. So I don't talk about a lot of people don't know I'm vegetarian, believe it or not, after all these books. And
I still ask when I'm making you things like, are you sure you don't eat shrimp?
Yeah. No, so does my mum, believe it or not. She's like, are you still not eating shrimp?
Yeah. So basically I'm just like your mom.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
Exactly. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Hetty.
Thank you.
Thank you, Books on America. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Yewande.
All right.
Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to everyone who asked questions. Thank you to Yewande for moderating such a wonderful conversation. And of course, thank you to Hetty for celebrating the launch of this gorgeous cookbook with us. So a few quick reminders. For those of you who are still with us on the YouTube live stream, you can buy a copy of Tenderheart by clicking the link in the description. For all of you with us here tonight, we have plenty of additional copies available for purchase. So if you didn't get one when you checked in, or just want another one, because why not? You can just see our booksellers up at the front. As I mentioned earlier, Hetty will be signing and personalizing books at the little window where the food once was. That food has been moved to the yellow cart, and there are some extras, so if you didn't get one, make sure you do. There's also a trash bin right next to that yellow cart, so please make sure that you grab your little boxes and forks and dispose of them. Let's see, what else do I have to say? We have copies of To Asia with Love as well, which if you don't have it yet for whatever reason that may be, I highly suggest you pick that up too. It's a delicious cookbook. Yeah, I think that's all. If you could all just line up down the center aisle for the signing line and kind of curve around to the wall, and just make sure you grab all of your personal belongings with you so that we can start to break down the space. Thank you so much.